We're going to get into some more revolutionary theory. I know I should always have this ready. Get that out before I address y'all, but I don't. So life goes on. Revolutions. I was want to expand the scope of what I'm just talking about. I was getting too particular. This is a general class about revolutions, okay? And let's see, just some housekeeping. Zimbabwe, South Africa, they had land reform, right? So there's other land reform. Land reform is so boring. But there's lots of revolutions. Every country's had a type of revolution with the Aristotle definition of constitutional leadership or coup d'etat and violent revolutions. I also want to make a distinction between sort of the revolutionary wars, the prolonged battles, lots of bloodshed, versus just a sort of over-the-night coup d'etat. So think about Abraham Lincoln's electoral revolution, since he was elected, and then his use of blood shed, and then John Wilkes Booth and subsequently Andrew Johnson's path to the presidency. So he was a Southern sympathizer, so therefore John Wilkes Booth said, well, if I assassinate the, Abraham Lincoln, if I could get him, then that would boost Andrew Johnson up, and therefore the South wouldn't totally lose, and they wouldn't be harshly dealt with. Which really, Lincoln's plan wasn't even harsh at all. He could have, they pushed for unconditional surrender, right? So Sherman unconditionally surrendered all the forces, right? So they completely lost. Sort of like how Vietnam had won, and that's a revolution, and I think that's a fascinating revolution. You had Ho Chi Minh, who had actually wrote to Truman saying, hey, can you help us out against these damn French? So every country's had 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 revolutions. Egypt's on their 4th revolution. And so what does that mean? Like, where's that come from? And since we're not on the same page, a revolutionary theory does need to be called for. Chris Hedges said, he's the one that talked about having a revolutionary theory. And so, I think I have a pretty good revolutionary theory out there. It's, all the bloody revolutions are bad. The coup d'etats are clearly wrong. How can you justify, like Andrew Johnson, he went to, and LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, they come to power after an assassination. So they weren't elected by the people, they weren't chosen. They were, on the same ticket, so they knew the deal that if the commander-in-chief dies and that it goes to the second in command, they understood that. Right? So, they was elected, not as president, but as vice president to take over in such a situation. But Andrew Johnson just undid everything, and Reconstruction wound up losing because of Andrew Johnson. So Abraham Lincoln's experiment lost ultimately because of Andrew Johnson, because of John Wilkes Booth. And so that's a revolution. John Wilkes Booth brought in a revolution, and Andrew Johnson or John Wilkes Booth a revolution through the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And we've had 4 assassinations in America. So there's JFK, Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, and William McKinley. So those are the 4, assassinations, and they've all been like, let's see, there's William McKinley, the guy, I forget what he shot him for, and then there's Garfield, and there was some guy that basically he wanted a political job, and he was the stalwart of stalwarts or something. But he wanted a political job, couldn't get one, and so he tries, how dare you? And I guess he was helping the opposition. And in exchange for his assassination, he thought he was going to get a job. So really just driven by a lone, desperate man. JFK, that's the story. There's a lone, desperate man. But back and to the left, there's a second gunman on the grassy knoll. And they're supposed to release all that information in 2 years, which is going to be awesome, okay? What has the government been keeping from us from JFK? Why did we have to wait 50, 60 years to see what they did? Were they involved? Did they do it, And do they have evidence that they did it? And that's sick. That's sick that they would actually keep that information away from us. Wish we had a Snowden when it came to the JFK files. But they're all kind of ridiculous. I think Garfield was the person, and so there's civil service reform. Instead of having sort of patronage, if you get into position of power, you can pass out jobs in repayment for your support, which is illegal. And so that had happened after the assassination of James Garfield. And then after the assassination, William McKinley is the one that actually pushed us into being an empire. 1898 Spanish-American War with the acquisition of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, Philippines. And so the Spanish-American War brings us into becoming an empire to having colonies. So there was an anti-imperialist league during McKinley's time, and Mark Twain and a lot of these guys. And so there's McKinley. He was shot. I'm not for sure what he was shot for. Some reason. Again, a lone kind of gunman, kind of lone nut. So all four of them have at least there was a kernel of truth, hopefully, right? Was he just a setup? Was Lee Harvey Oswald just a patsy, like he said? Who knows? That one is. And then even with Lincoln, the gun is a right-handed gun, even though James Wilkes Booth was left-handed. And we've had 44, 45 presidents, so we've had a peaceful turnover of power, every 4 years. So that's a good tradition. That's a tradition not all countries can brag about. It's the reason why there's so many coups d'etats in Latin America, coup d'etat after coup d'etat, in Africa too. Basically, it's just thugs, one group of thugs taking power over the other group of thugs, and sort of like the chimpanzees, whoever the alpha males are the ones that stay in power. And that's just a horrible system. You can't have democracy. There's no stability. And so it has to be peaceful. It has to be an electoral revolution or constitutional revolutions with people power behind it, right? So it has to stay strictly nonviolent. I believe in Gandhi and MLK's way. When they had the revolutions for land reform and mine reform in Bolivia, someone says, what keeps an owner from just blowing up his own factory, blowing up the mines? The people were in the factories. The people were in the mines. So that's what would prevent you from blowing up your own factory. You would kill people. So while understanding it's non-violent, but sort of understand the dynamics of how, I don't know, violence can play a role into the entire equation. So whereas, okay, we're non-violent, but you have MLK who gets shot, and therefore the movement stops, but he becomes a martyr for the cause. So, pros and cons with anything, right? But that's, it put a stop to what he was actually trying to do. And so, think about sort of, I don't know, being on the front lines. There's people who are in the factories who are peacefully holding hands, who are getting pepper sprayed on Occupy. Those people are on the front lines of the totalitarian fascist police state. So they're on the front lines, and if something was to happen to them, there would be lots of sympathy throughout the entire world, because now, look, you're killing people in order to justify your aims. And it might not work, and so that is a gamble. And so I think you have to recognize that. So nonviolent without being naive, right? You could be for self-defense, defend other people, but that's it. Only in self-defense is violence even considered. So the only way revolutions can happen in today's day and age is through electoral or constitutional revolution. And actually, I want to bring up I'll bring it up actually later. But there's an interesting phenomenon that keeps on happening, where you'll have Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro, Mujica, who's a Marxist revolutionary, Hitler. They'll stand up and declare a revolution, and it'll be failed, and it'll be an attempted, push, an attempted coup d'etat, an attempted takeover of the government by force, which is how Lenin and company got power, right? Instead of letting the provisional government come up with their reforms, they just took power. So there's two revolutions with the Russian revolutions, right? So I think there's like a February and an October revolution. So two revolutions in 1 year, is that really a revolution? Now it's like, then they fought a civil war for like 6 years. So they're really defining the historical terms on all this. And also in Kentucky, every 4 years there's been a peaceful turnover in power too. And actually, the having 2 terms is relatively new. And we've only had one candidate, I think, Patton, who actually did the second. And so Brashear, so only 2 people have done 2 terms, and so that's always a revolution, always an overturn of. And also, there's 120 counties, and every 4 years, there's all the seats are up for election. Anytime there's an exchange in Gallatin County, which is actually has 113 black folks in northern Kentucky, they have an 8,600 people total. So there's 8,500 whites. Overwhelming. If you was to spit and you had a crowd of Gallatin County, you would hit a white person like this. If you threw a water balloon, it would definitely hit a white person. It's white all over the place, right? So for any of the Confederate out there, the stupid racists, the white supremacists, you guys are lame. You're not brave. You're very cowardly and stupid. And it's 2014. Not only should we be treating black people the same, but gay people, transgender people, handicapped people, really anybody, right? Anybody that has any type of difference, which isn't even a disorder or a deformity, any cultural difference. We should appreciate our differences. We're an immigrant nation. We're the Rainbow Revolution. It's the only type of nationalism is to be for immigration or integration for all the immigrants. So a big rainbow pile of wonderful differences between everybody. But each one of these, Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro, they had like a sort of sordid past where they tried to have a forceful military takeover, and then they would be thrown in prison or exiled, and then they come back and they win. Either, I think in Fidel Castro's case, an actual revolution, and then they get elected into it. Hugo Chavez, he goes to prison, comes back out, and is elected. Mujica, I just heard he was a guerrilla, so he probably killed people. And then Hitler, he was a game changer for the whole world. He really shook the world up, right? I was answering my own question about the revolutions of Canada. Canada has not had anything where they would call a revolution, but they've had a turnover in government. And actually, I wanted to check that out just to make sure. I assume so. They have like some sort of prime minister or something. I know that there's some provinces that still have allegiance to the Queen, and some of them are still speaking French. I think Quebec is French speaking, and so there's the War of 1812 is actually when Canada became Canada. He had the English who was fighting the new republic, the Americans, and basically coming back, which we should have allied with France and defeated them and then just been done with them, but instead they just keep coming back, and now they're latching on to us, and I feel like that's the only reason they're still alive. They're just a little tiny parasite on the Empire America, so basically they just keep on. Maybe they're too sophisticated. Their language, you just, wow, they're so sophisticated. You just get, confused, and you're like, well, they must know what they're talking about. But really, Chris, not Hedges, but Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens, he was a snob. Well, indubitably, if you think about this and this and this, and there is no God. But there's been a British invasion, actually. John Oliver, he's amazing. I'm glad he's got his own HBO show. He said something about how America, he fell in love with America during its downfall. So he basically fell in love with a drunk woman who's, totally plastered and is puking all over herself. That's the analogy he used for America. Ricky Gervais, John Oliver, that's all I could think of. Borat. So there's actually been several English-speaking people, right, that's come over and have done their thing. They got on CNN. That Chelsea Handler just hated. And who, no wonder everybody hates you. Who actually took a courageous stance on gun control. Nobody had actually took that stance. Piers Morgan. So there's a lot of Brits actually coming over here and giving us good analysis on ourselves, because an outsider can have a really sharp perspective on what it is that they see. So yeah, expand the revolutions. It's not just the targeted, legalized marijuana and land reform, but it's just the study. I'm thinking about revolutions in general. There's Russian revolutions, Haitian revolutions, Cuban revolutions, It's the Lincoln versus John Wilkes Booth. Think about that. And also, there's been 4 world wars before the American Revolution. So I think we have to get away from the American Revolution actually being a revolution. It's what we call it. And so it's going to probably, that name is going to stick, but just understand that it's with reservations. There's a lot of things that wasn't revolutionary about the Revolutionary War. There's got to be a change, you know, a massive change, and really the aristocrat plantation owner people still had all the money and all the power, and the masses did not.